Good morning, everyone. So nice to see everybody here in the middle of our, what I'm calling a seasonal meltdown. Yeah, however you want to define that meltdown. Yeah. So, all of a sudden, we're finding ourselves in the middle of one season. It's just early. So, you might want to dig out your muck grapes this afternoon. We're going to go for a little walk on the back of the Well, this morning, I'd like to welcome our guests who are going to be presenting the service material later in the service. It's so great to have Helmuth here from Woodstock and Stuart Kinney, who you have seen in the building before in recent days. Where's Stuart? Oh, okay. You're in my blind spot in the spotlight here. So yeah, it's great to have. They've been working on this service for a while now. Welcome to Unitarian Society this morning. For our prelude, this is a piece by Debussy, played by Thile, and you'll notice the mandolin being featured in this classical piece. So let us center ourselves this morning. In this moment of centering silence, let us find our breath and find our center. Let us relax into this space and this time and listen to the sound of the singing bowl. going to light our chalices. And Catherine volunteered. Well, I asked her to light the chalice. I thought I'd give her a little heads up. But she said yes. So it's her first time, so.
Always yummy.
In a world filled with the darkness of ignorance, let us bring the light of reason. In a world filled with the darkness of despair, may we share the light of hope. In a world filled with the darkness of hate, let us shine the light of love brightly. So on the altar this morning, on the side table, I brought in some river rocks from the Meduxnique St. John watershed. These are some river rocks from our place in Monticello. There's one that stays here in the Unitarian parlor. This nesting of two rocks that I found in the stream, and there's this dimple, indentation, just waiting for a rock to sit and nestle perfectly. Just a metaphor for religious community and our national reality. So I'd like to share words this morning from John Muir, Henry David Thoreau, and from Gary Snyder. Gary Snyder is a West Coast poet who coined the term I never heard before of bioregional watershed politics, saying that the most natural way to associate together sharing mutual interest is your watershed. Who's upstream, who's downstream. And it makes sense to know the culture, the history, the economy, the wildlife, to know that region like the back and the front of your hand. John Muir said, "The sun shines not on us, but in us. The rivers flow not past, but through us. Thrilling, tingling, vibrating every fiber and cell of the substance of our bodies, making them glide and sing. The trees wave and the flowers bloom in our bodies as well as our souls, and every bird song, wind song, and tremendous storm song of the rocks in the heart of the mountains is our song, our very own. And it constantly sings our love." And one of my favorite Henry David Thoreau quotes is, "Let us spend one day as deliberately as nature." And our topic for today would be an example of our region's version of Thoreau, exploring and writing and blending with and becoming a part of that natural flow. Is deliberate, is natural, is intelligent, is creative. And each one of us does it in our own way. Gary Snyder said, "When you find your place, your practice begins." For our offertory this morning, we have St. Patrick's Day is coming up this week. It's going to be in the 50s today and Monday and Tuesday. So I found some Irish jigs. Eavesdropper, both meat and drink, and off we go by Linda's favorite band of all time, Great Big Sea. Happens to be Canadian, Newfoundland, connections. On the piano, you'll find our Pishka collection for local needs in our area, in our congregation. There's a FOFO can, which means Friends of a Frisbee Organ, that Dale Holden, our pianist and organist, keeps an eye on the chairs. Any donations to the upkeep of the organ, you can do that on the piano. It was a building fund job. And there's more coffee on the table if you need a refill before the presentation this morning. And Byron, I need an usher again. We're filling in from that. Let us give with hearts of gladness this morning.
Right, and I'll wait for it.
I would like to introduce our speakers. Keith Helmuth is a publisher and managing editor of Chalice Lighting. He worked for 2 decades managing independent bookstores that serve university communities. He's library manager and faculty member at Friends World College and coordinator of its independent studies program. He's a founding trustee. I know this is getting long. It's a long list, but this is important to get a few of these details in here. Founding trustee at Quaker Institute for the Future and served for 2 decades as co-editor of his book publishing program. Keith is the author of several books, Tappan Adney and the Heritage of St. John River Valley, which I have a personal copy that was gifted to me here, beautifully illustrated on the inside. I also have a pamphlet that I brought from the Connell House, where this Tappan Adney room resides. And I'm going to place this on the altar as the guys come to talk. Keith was here a few years ago, if you remember, on another book you've written on right relationship, building a whole earth economy. And we were doing a theme that year on the Great Turning, the Joanna Macy theme. And your book fitting perfectly. And you came for a lecture and a talk. The space may look different because the room was facing this direction. The lectern was on that side. We occasionally shift or rotate around. So this time, just to mix things up, we're facing the room this way for a key. And Stuart, again, he'll introduce himself. You know him here. This is a tandem duel, or 2 of them. I'm excited about the presentation, so I'm going to clear the pulpit and turn things over to them. Please give them a welcoming round of applause.
Well, this is an important occasion for me to be back in this room. I want to say how encouraging it is to see you people and Dave carrying on this tradition. I go by this building many times, and I look and I see, and it's a beautiful building, but what's inside is equally beautiful. So I just want to make that statement. Well, thanks for the opportunity to meet with you this morning and to share a bit of the Tappan Adney story, which is not only rich in the cultural heritage of our region, but also relevant in the present and for the future. I have over here a display of books about and on Tappan Adney, or by Tappan Adney. A new biography that we published in October is available there. And there's cards, my business card there is available for any of you that want to go online and order the book. Dave said initially that I should bring a pile of books, but that's just not possible and it wouldn't have been appropriate. There's a border in between and that makes it possible. I will provide a short introduction to Tappan Adney's life and accomplishments, and then Stuart Kinney will read some selections from his writing. Tappan Adney was born in Athens, Ohio, 3 years after the end of the American Civil War. His father was a university professor of agriculture and natural history. When Tappan was 5, the family purchased a farm in North Carolina. Adney was homeschooled by his father in academic studies and outdoor natural history education. At the age of 12, he was admitted to the University of North Carolina as a provisional student. The next year, he was admitted as a regular student. So you get some sense of the person he was at a very young age. It was reported that he participated in the debating societies with great skill at the age of 13 at the University of North Carolina. But that was not good enough for his mother and her children. The next year, she established a boarding house business in New York City, so Tappan and his younger sister, Mary, would have access to the best educational and cultural environment in the nation. For the next 4 years, Adney was a student at Trinity, the top university prep school in the city. In addition to his skill as an artist, which was evident at an early age, he earned the admission to classes offered by the New York Students' Art League. During this time, he also joined 2 natural history organizations. As a high school age student in Kinney, he joined these scientific organizations, the Linnaean Society and the American Ornithologists Union, of which he was a founding member. Later on, he also was a founding member of the Explorers Club in New York a few years later. And there are several of his large oil paintings that hang on the wall of the Explorers Club in New York City headquarters to this day. After graduation from Trinity in 1887, at the age of 18, Tappan Adney came to Woodstock, New Brunswick for a summer holiday. He was on track to enter Columbia University in the fall. Instead, he remained in New Brunswick for 18 months, and it changed the course of his life. He returned to New Brunswick 5 times in the next 10 years, spending more time in the province than in New York, where he was developing a successful career as a natural history journalist, illustrator, and lecturer based on his immersion in the deep woods environment of New Brunswick. He eventually made Upper Woodstock his home, and he married Minnie Bell Sharp, a member of a prominent local family. Around the time that Adney was developing his natural history journalism career, that's when John Muir was actually writing his first books, The Mountains of California, and the awareness of the importance of the conservation movement was coming on strong. So he was part of that whole period of awareness. Adney had been a student of natural history since childhood and was captivated by the forest environment he found in New Brunswick, along with the hunting, fishing, and trapping cultures of both the settler and the indigenous communities. But in particular, and by his own admission, he, quote, fell in love with the birch bark canoe. One of the books over there shows the canoes in the model canoes that he built in their museum setting. And if you only look at one book, that's the one to look at, and it's a beautiful display of the work that he actually did. During the second summer in New Brunswick, he became an apprentice to Peter Joe, an indigenous canoe builder, and began to record and illustrate every detail of canoe construction. Adney is the man who saved the birch bark canoe from extinction. His book, The Bark Canoes and Skin Boats of North America, was eventually published by the Smithsonian Institution and is the workbench Bible of all those who are again building birch bark canoes. There's been a renaissance in the last few decades of birch bark canoe building of New Brunswick and out and throughout New England. There's a copy of the book over there too that you can look at. But more than this, Adney also set out on a long-term project of building 1/5 scale models of all the indigenous canoe designs from across the whole of North America. 1/5 scale is like this, and he did this so he could show every detail of construction that was used, the materials taken from the woods in the authentic tradition. He built over 150 model canoes, a unique accomplishment that is regarded as a high point in the ethnographic preservation of indigenous material culture in North America. Saving the knowledge of how to build birch bark canoes is what Adney is best known for, but it is only one of his accomplishments. Adney also had a great facility for language learning. When he apprenticed with Peter Joe, he picked up the Wolastoqey language, went on to systematic study, and became a fluent speaker. Maliseet is the name that we're traditionally known, people of New Brunswick, St. John River Valley, but their actual name is the Wolastoqey, and in the last couple of decades, there's a determined effort in New Brunswick and in Canada to recover that name, which comes from the original name of the river, which is the Wolastoq, which means something to the effect of the beautiful and bountiful river. The people that lived along that river took their name from that, and so that's the actual name now used in New Brunswick. He compiled the first glossary of the language, which prepared the way for later dictionaries and other language preservation materials. He became as devoted to the preservation of the Wolastoqey language as he was to preserving the birch bark canoe. By 1897, Adney's reputation in New York publishing circles as a top-notch natural history and ethnographic journalist brought him an assignment from Harper's Weekly to cover the Klondike Gold Rush. Stuart will return to this story, which is another big story in his life in one of his readings. Adney lived in Montreal for a bit more than a decade, doing contract work as a researcher and consultant for the Ethnographic Museum at McGill University, and in addition doing freelance commissioned artwork of various kinds, including public murals, architectural carvings, and heraldic paintings. He returned to his home in Upper Woodstock in the early 1930s and settled into research on linguistics and the preservation of the Wolastoqey culture. But most of all, in his latter years, he was a consultant and an intervener for the Wolastoqey Nation in their relationship with the Canadian government and became a fierce defender of their indigenous rights. His accomplishments in this regard include the discovery of the Peace and Friendship Treaty from 1725 between the British Crown and the Wabanaki nations of the region, This treaty guaranteed continued access of indigenous communities to the resources of the land and in no way specifies the surrender of any indigenous territory, which is a unique situation in North America because it's now the basis of the major land claims negotiations in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, because that territory was never ceded. Adney introduced this treaty into the Canadian legal system in a court case in Woodstock in 1946. This treaty has become the basis for the Canadian Supreme Court upholding the right of access for Indigenous people of the Maritimes to the natural resources of their territory. The persistence of Adney's research and advocacy stands at the head of this new era in the recognition of Indigenous rights. Tappan Adney was not a religious man in a conventional speaking sense, but there was something in him that called up the ethic of service over the course of his whole life, and in his last years to devote his time and energy to the preservation of the Wolastoqey nation and the welfare of its people. William Solace, chief of the Toby band, who relied on Adney for interventions in dealing with the Canadian government, writes to Adney in 1948, "I don't know how far I would have got, or how far I would have gone without your guiding hand. I only hope you will be able to carry on for years to come. Side by side, we have treaded along with one thing in view, the real justice for the tribe." A year before Adney's death in 1950, Chief Solace again writes to him, "You have come to know me truly in all my dealings and contacts with you, and I have foreseen from the first day we met that you were one man that could be trusted, because on the base of our talk that day, printed in my heart the nature of the man you were. I have always said that no white man could ever understand an Indian unless he had Indian blood in his veins. But how greatly I made that mistake, because you understood me thoroughly. You even knowed my feelings. I will never forget my true friend." These words of Chief Solace will give you an indication of the regard in which Tappan Adney is held among the Wolastoqey people even today. Now, Stuart will take over with some readings.
Thank you, Keith. And thank you to the members of this community for welcoming us here this morning to share a little bit about this remarkable individual. And I want to commend to your consideration this very fine biography that has been published jointly by Chapel Street Editions in Woodstock and Goose Lane Publishers in Fredericton. And the story of Tappan Adney is well related in this book. It's a fascinating life, but I'll also say that the bringing to publication of this work itself is its own fascinating story, and it is recounted briefly within the covers, between the covers, and there's a long, like it would take 10 or 15 minutes to sort of describe the whole thing, but this book has been, I'll say, decades in the production, and it's really fabulous, and it is a credit to Keith's tenacity that we have this volume available to us. That's the end of the advertisement. And so I'm going to read a few excerpts, and it occurred to me that it would be really useful if you were to hear Tappan Adney's own voice. And so the excerpts I'm going to read are all things that are taken from his correspondence, and they provide I hope that they'll provide, first of all, to touch on some very key aspects of his life and his work and his keen insight into the world around him. And, but they'll give you a sense of the extraordinary individual that he was. I want to say at the outset that there are going to be certain places where maybe using a word that might seem anachronistic today or improper in our current understanding. The word Indian appears numerous times in his work. Also, as Keith said, he talks about malice as opposed to ballistiquae. But these reflect words written by him and are retained in the book and are retained in my reading this morning. Now, there's a very brief section here that I want to start with, and it just reminds us of what happened when Tappan Adney first came to New Brunswick. He was captivated by the natural world that he found himself in, and he briefly in the book describes, there's an excerpt where he describes the impact that it had on his life. And I think it's pretty significant that a person who had the education and upbringing and so much opportunity lying before him was so taken with the small rural corner of the world that we inhabit, very much the same in Woodstock as it is in Holden and in Carleton County as it is in Aroostook County. And this short passage demonstrates why life in surroundings such as ours, I think, can have such depth of meaning. And he says this about it: "Nothing had a more positive influence upon my life. It determined the whole manner of my later life, and when I set to earn a livelihood, it supplied the experience that was of the greatest service to me. But here was a whole new world thrown open, a kind of air I had never breathed before. One had but to go half a mile back to find traces of an original forest that are now as wild-looking as any that one will find in the remotest wilderness. No woods ever impressed me as these woods did." The next section we're going to talk just a little bit briefly about his, as we're aware, one of the great episodes of his life, one of the great adventures, and for which he gained quite considerable notoriety, was his travel to the Yukon to chronicle the great gold rush of the 1890s. And he did that on behalf of the publication Harper's Weekly, and I'm going to talk just a little bit about that. But as interesting as his stay in Dawson City and the experiences he had there among all the prospectors was, the journey there was its own adventure. It was through mountains and along the course of rivers, and it was perilous and it was challenging and very arduous. So he described that travel just as the late fall freeze-up was underway, and it's in the following terms. "The water freezes to the oars until they become unmanageable, and again we have to stop and pound the ice off with an axe. Mittens are frozen stiff, mustaches a mass of icicles, and no matter how hard we work, we cannot keep warm. The current is swift. Following the roughest water to avoid the rocks, we are soon in the dancing waves and pitching far worse than in the prior canyon. As we jump from wave to wave, it seems positively as if boat and all would keep right on through to the bottom of the river. The water now is pouring in, and it is plain that the boat will never live through. One thought alone comforts us: the fearful impetus with which we are moving must surely take us bodily through and out, and then we can make the shore somehow. I count the seconds that will take us through. From sides and ends, a sheet of water pours over, drenching brown and filling the boat. The same instant, it seems, a big side wave takes the little craft, spins her like a top, quick as a wink, throws her into a boiling eddy on the left, and we are through and safe, with a little more work to get ashore. Men who were watching us from the bank said that we disappeared from sight in the trough. Brown is wet up to his waist. Everything is afloat. We jump out leg deep into the water near shore, and when we have bailed out some water, we unload, pitch tent, and while tripping back for our 500 pounds of goods, watch the other boats come through. Our goods in the boat are not damaged because the sacks were tight and they were wet for so short a time. Adney's interest in the language of the Wolastoqey people, which Keith has referred to, and again, it's referred to him in this passage as Maliseet. But his interest in that language, I think, really compelled him to understand more fully the manner in which language itself is developed, and how vocalizations, the sounds that we make, arise from observations around us in the development of language. And here, just astonishingly, he describes an interaction with a squirrel at his home in Upper Woodstock. And this is in a letter he wrote to a colleague. By the way, I'm discovering origins of language through observation of some friendly red squirrels that I have been regularly feeding. I chose the subject of eating as one upon which I felt we, that's he and the squirrels, by the way, could arrive at a mutual understanding in spite of speech limitations on both sides. They give out a call when they hear my back screen door slam. If I answer back, one comes threading his way along the limbs to the roof of a low woodshed and stops. I move my lips, giving at the same time a smacking sound. The squirrel instantly makes the same lips gesture, repeating it each time after me. Both of us understand and have come to understand that the subject is eating apple, butternut, etc. I was in the rear room of my bungalow, lying on a couch reading. I had lifted a small board in the floor so squirrels could enter. When I heard or saw them, I gave the mouth signal, then gave them some apple or other food. This time, I heard a squirrel enter and gave the usual signal, which meant eating, because I never lied to them. And I went on reading. The squirrel, finding no apple anywhere, came up to the couch at my shoulder. Then he ran up and touched my lips with his, jumped back, and repeated the act. Now, he had not seen my lips moving when he heard the sound, but he had heard that accompanying vocalization and clearly associated with eating, and plainly had said to me, in effect, "You just spoke about eating. What about it?" What had occurred was the process which I call translation of visual terms into vocal terms, and the same process runs through all language and forms its very basis. First, there is a visible, tangible phenomena of one kind or another, then a concept. First, a visible action or gesture of the mouth, leading to the concept of eating. Given expression in the vocal field as an element of language. I did not give the M sound, but another obvious mouth sound. Our vocal organs are too dissimilar for each to imitate the sounds made by the other. We stood on no common ground on that, but we did so on the mental field. My little squirrel friend has shown me his ability to observe, to make comparisons via what William James calls his storehouse of memory, his cerebellum, then to observe differences in the nature of such phenomena as concern him, as he is interested in, as well as resemblances. He has thus established a basis in his little cosmos of classification, and the same faculty and identical mental processes lie at the base of human language and of every system of classification that can be said to be based in nature. It is all a matter of extent and degree, and not of kind. And the last excerpt I want to read for you, as Keith mentioned, Tappan Adney was what I would say is an early herald of Indigenous rights. His very good friend Peter Paul of the Woodstock First Nation was charged with cutting ash on private lands. Adney researched the matter thoroughly, as Keith has alluded to, and developed a defense strategy for Paul, which he describes in a letter that he penned to his friend as follows. The relationship of the Maliseet Indians of the St. John to the English is not the ordinary one of citizens, but of solemn treaty rights. In the treaties with the English at Boston and later at Nova Scotia, the Indians were guaranteed of remaining in possession of certain rights pertaining to a hunting people, Among these was the free liberty of hunting and fishing. Your people were, in all treaties, considered as a sovereign nation and as owners of the soil. But many of his rights, that's of the Indian, have been taken away. He has been made subject to the game and fishing laws, and there have been violations of his treaty rights against which he has been powerless to protest effectively. One of the most important of these violations of treaty rights concerns the land. The British authorities, at the close of the Revolutionary War in 1783, were faced with the problem of numerous loyalist troops and their families. Without consulting the Indians and without their permission, the government, the British authorities, surveyed both sides of the river, the St. John River, and allotted lands to disbanded soldiers of the loyalist troops. Now, the law among nations is that the terms of a treaty cannot be changed without the consent of both parties. The Indians have never given their consent, except as forced by superior pressure, to any change in the treaty. In the transfer of authority to the Canadian government, the Ottawa government undertook to carry out the terms of the treaties made previously with King George, and has made of the Indians what it terms wards. Now, in some of the provinces, the Indians have formally surrendered their lands to the Crown. There is no record that the Indians of the St. John have ever made such surrender. Consequently, the issue between you, Peter Paul, and the man who claims ownership of the land where you have been cutting your barrel hoop poles is one of right and title. Even if you are arrested for theft or trespass, no magistrate has powers to deal with the case. Go right ahead, and if the matter comes to trial, I will see you represented by counsel. The complainant will be asked to prove his title, and that will raise the question of the Crown's right to dispose of the Indian's land and land rights belonging to him by treaty. In the event of the charge being laid, civil or criminal, against the Indian Peter Paul, I will ask for dismissal with costs to the complainant. Well, that's just a little sample of the very precise words of Tappan Adney himself to give you a sense of what an extraordinary individual that he was. I'll conclude by just mentioning a couple of, Keith has mentioned the books that are on display here that he has brought along. I brought two articles. There's one on this music stand, and it is from a magazine from 1901 called Outing Magazine, and it was for outdoor enthusiasts. And this is all about sled dogs of the North. It was written in 1901 and published in that magazine. And the excerpt that I read to you from the book about the travel to the Yukon actually is an excerpt from an article written originally by Tappan Adney for Harper's Weekly. This is an original version of that magazine from 1898. And there is this extensive article with a lot of illustrations and photographs inside detailing it's called From Lake Bennett to Dawson, and it's multiple pages in this magazine, as you can see, heavily illustrated with Tappan Adney's own drawings and with photographs that he took and sent along to Harper's for publication. And eventually, all of that work was compiled and put into the book called The Klondike Stampede. So we encourage you to have a look at these items. The only thing I might say is about these two magazine articles, if you could keep food and beverage away from them, I would appreciate that. But please have a chance to look at them and just discover, and the books as well, and discover a little bit more about this remarkable individual. Thank you so much for the chance to be here. Keith, do you want to say a concluding word?
We had talked with David about making time for questions and answers and discussion. And so this is the opportunity. We have a little bit of time, I think, David, that's right?
We do, yeah, let's take 5 or 10 minutes for some Q&A.
Yeah, so
getting coffee
we're
hour.
happy to answer questions. There's a lot of aspects of Adney's life and story that are so interesting. We've only alluded to some of them. And so if you have questions, for example, one thing we could elaborate on is where are all these canoe models? What museum are they in? Well, they are in the Mariners Museum in Newport News, Virginia. Over 100 models were purchased from Tappan Adney in his latter years because he tried to sell this collection of canoes to Canadian museums first and to American museums second during the Depression years. And they either didn't have money or they weren't really interested in model canoes, and they ended up being transferred and highly valued of a new museum that was being built in Newport News, Virginia, which is a Mariners Museum. So they're well curated and well cared for, and you can see them in that book. So that would give you an example of one of the other stories. But any questions or you have? Yeah.
We went to the Beaver Brook, what was it, 2 years ago? And there was a full-size canoe there that was in an attic in Ireland of a museum, of a university, and was brought back over. And it seems to me like, wouldn't it be fantastic if there was a show that would detail his research next to that canoe? And is there any museum material available that we can go and see either in Woodstock or in Fredericton?
There is. The New Brunswick Museum holds, I think, 6 or 7 of his canoes.
Fantastic.
Model canoes. So there are some in New Brunswick. There are others are scattered around other places in other museums in small numbers.
Mm-hmm.
But New Brunswick does have this collection. The New Brunswick Museum is temporarily closed to any further work or display because they're going to build a whole new building.
Yeah,
most of their things are now in storage.
we passed that yesterday in St. John.
That canoe that came from Ireland was from New Brunswick. When it went to Ireland, a retiring person took it back, and then they found it later, and it was returned. It's known as the grandfather canoe, is it, or grandmother canoe?
Yeah, it's huge.
But it's presumably the oldest canoe in existence that's been preserved.
I thought it was fascinating. We were looking at the canoe, and then one of the museum people in the text, it said it was made within a few hundred yards of where it's located
Yeah,
now.
It was made in the shore of the river in Fredericton, or the
Fredericton, yes.
area. Yeah, it was
Keith, I do think it's useful to supplement the answer to that question just a little bit to say, and many of you may already be aware of this, but the Connell House Museum in Woodstock has an extensive installation regarding Tappan Adney. There's an entire room there. There's video material. There are, there's his old typewriters there. There's some of his artwork and things like that. So that's, if you haven't visited that, that's very close by.
And 3 of his model canoes are on long-term loan from the New Brunswick Museum that are on exhibit in the Connell House in Woodstock, so they can be seen there.
Thank you.
So, I bought one of the copies of this wonderful book about Tappan Adney, and lo and behold, I had to buy 5 more. Because there's a lot more than these gentlemen have talked about. There's the relationship with his wife, who was a musician. There is who took care of him after his wife had passed away, and he was taken care of by a member of the Woodstock First Nation. There's so much more else in there than what you have heard. So I highly recommend it.
Thank you.
Yes.
What's like one of your personal favorite stories about him? What is something that has just struck you, as so significant? If you can pick one. You can narrow it down to a couple. And I won't quote you.
The squirrel thing was.
Well, there's so many subsidiary stories about his life. Actually, the one that Stuart read about the squirrel, that distinct, oh, there is one other one that's in the book, and it comes from a gentleman, Leon Thornton, who was a young boy who knew Tappan Adney when he was an older man. Tappan Adney had the reputation of being an eccentric old man that lived in the woods. People in the neighborhood, one mother warned her children not to go near him because he wore sandals. Strange in that day. But Leon Thornton recorded, tape recorded his story fairly recently, and it's in the book. He was, as a young boy, his family had a cow that was in a pasture nearby, and he would go in the mornings to do the milking of this cow and take the milk back to Woodstock on his bicycle. And one time when he was out there, near where Tappan Adney lived, he saw a partridge up on the roof of a potato house. And there's a small potato laying in the field, and he picked it up and he threw it at the partridge. And he heard behind him, "Young man, why did you throw that potato at the partridge?" and he knew it was Tappan Adney, and fairly stern voice, he said, "Don't you know that animals can be your friends?" And so that story is much more detailed, and Tappan Adney invited him to come by sometime and to learn about the life in the woods. He had trails in the woods, and those, well, there's a parkland preserve where Tappan Adney lived now, and there's trails, and that's open to people to come and walk and visit in Upper Woodstock. Let's see, I lost my train of thought. So that's one of the stories that illustrates another old side of Tappan Adney, because when he came to New Brunswick, he participated in the hunting and in outdoor wilderness life, trapping. He learned all those skills as a young man because he was an anthropologist. But in his later years, or after that period of time of that learning, he never really hunted again because he was a different attitude about the conservation of wildlife, and it comes out in that story. So the woman that bought the land that he was living on was Ada Fleming, who founded the Kindness Club in New Brunswick, and it spread worldwide. It was something very active in earlier years. Albert Schweitzer was the honorary president of that club for the preservation and the cultivation of a different attitude toward wildlife than is common. So that is an evolution in Adney's interest from the whole spectrum of the relationship of human beings to their environment, and the wildlife and the animals evolved with him into a very strong conservation ethic. And so that land has been preserved by Ada Fleming with that idea in mind. So that's one of the stories that continues to be present and carry into the future as the negotiations between the Westlake Bay people and the Canadian government and the provincial government is now currently on the basis of those treaties that he discovered. So there's a whole range of things that he was really in the forefront of developing culturally.
I just add a little brief, I would say echo what Keith has said, is that also is one of my favorite stories from the book and about the life of Adney, and it along with the thing about the squirrel and the language, to me typifies just this whole ethos about a relationship to the natural world that we're part of. And just a couple of sentences here that describe this visit with this young boy. He took him out walking, and the young boy said, I don't think there would have been any other place within miles where you would have seen as many birds that were totally fearless as there were there. Absolutely fearless. And he, Tappan, seemed to be able to emit these queer little whistles and other sounds, and he had those birds literally twittering around his head or land on top of his head. He had the complete and utter trust of all wildlife.
Well,
I forgot one primary detail of this story that we're not told. When he turned around and looked up at Tappan Adney, there was a squirrel in his shoulder. And Tappan Adney gave a whistle, and the partridge flew down and lit on him. That sounds like a Leon Thornton was a teacher at community college, a very sober, rational man, and he saw that happen. So that's an example of how the rapport that he had with the wildlife around him, which was, it's an extraordinary thing. Yeah.
Well, I am going to slide in. I encourage you during coffee hour to continue these conversations with Keith and Stuart. I just love these stories come to life. So thank you so much for this presentation this morning, coming and sharing with us this amazing story, and just touching upon a few of the details. There's so much more to the story. I encourage you once again to purchase the book online. We're going to sing number 414 as an exit song this morning in closing. Dale is going to play through it one time. It just has one verse, so be ready. You're only going to get one chance as we leave this friendly place. And shall we stand? As we extinguish the chalice, may the blessing of truth be upon us, the power of love direct and sustain us, and may the peace of this community preserve our going out and our coming in, wherever we may go this week. From this time forth, until we meet again, as dear friends and colleagues. Amen. You may be seated. And again, much appreciation that we can share today. I encourage you to come down and look at the books and material.